Are you financially fit? Does it even matter? Ted is here. Let's begin.
This is Debt Free in 30. Here's your host, Doug Hoyes.
My name's Doug Hoyes. Your name's Ted Michalos.
It is.
I like to start the show off so everyone knows who we are. And this is our favorite month of the year, November, Financial Literacy Month.
What?
And what? Huh? What? And just for everybody watching or everybody who's listening, Ted does not have any cue cards. He is only finding out the topic of today's show with you.
Which is the way most people feel about financial literacy.
Well, and I wanted to ask you about that. So this is, like I said, we're on episode 532, first week of November. It's Financial Literacy Month. And, you know, I have a biased view of it. What is your view of Financial Literacy Month?
So who pays for all the Financial Literacy Month stuff?
The government, I think.
The government, I don't think it's sponsored by the banks or the folks that lend you money.
Yeah, so there's
we haven't got a new sponsorship deal, do we?
We do not.
Okay, good. Well, we'll carry on.
That's right. But if anyone does, 10 years, somebody will eventually sponsor us. So the government through the Financial Consumer Agency,
they created
it. And then every bank, every lender, every financial institution jumps on board and says, oh, we got this special thing for this month. And like you and I are both big believers in financial literacy.
It could save a lot of people a lot of grief if they actually understood what was going on.
Exactly. And so we're all for that. The issue, of course, is that everybody has a bias. Everybody has something to sell.
Except for you personally. Nobody else is interested in you being financially literate. It's not in anyone's best interest for you to understand how all of this stuff works.
Yeah, when I go to buy a car, they want me to sign on the dotted line, not take their agreement home and read it for 3 days before signing it.
Right, because it would take 3 days.
Yeah, you'd have to have a lawyer and all the rest of it. So it is better to be illiterate.
I think we're drifting.
Well, we are, but the topic of today's show is what is considered financially fit. So we are here in Financial Literacy Month.
Right.
So I guess we could ask the question, what is financial literacy? But let's make it even simpler and say, what does it mean to be financially fit? So let's start with a very simple question, was when you think of the word fit, what do you think of?
You think of physical fitness, right? Can you walk up and down a set of stairs without,
Exactly.
I'm not getting excited because you're in the room.
That's
with me.
right. That's right.
I'm trying to mimic being out of breath.
That's why we always sit down and wait for 10 minutes before we start the show, because it's a long walk to get here from your office across the hall. So yes, I would define fit as being able to do what it is you want to do. And you're right, fitness. So do I want to run a marathon? Okay, well, that's a different level of fitness than if I want to do 20 push-ups or if I want to, I don't know, chop wood or whatever it is. Right. So, and, I wear the watch that tells me what my heart rate is, and it'll tell me if I slept and, what's kind of gives me my fitness level. It would be kind of cool if we had such a thing for financial fitness.
Yeah, and now that we've suggested it, no doubt someone will create such a thing.
In fact, we should.
An app for your phone.
Well, there's lots of apps. Do they track fitness? That's an interesting question. So we're gonna talk about that.
Right.
So this might actually be a business opportunity here. So
not for us
because we're too lazy. But yes, that would be kind of cool to have I guess it would be called the Debt Free in 30 financial fitness app.
Right.
And what would be the components of that? So I've got a list here.
Okay.
I'm going to run them by you, and you tell me if you think I'm on the
yay
right
or
track.
nay?
Yes, exactly. So when you think of financial fitness, the first thing that would pop into my mind would be, well, I have a positive net worth. So now, whether you agree with that or not,
I would think financial fitness, the first thing that comes into my mind is, do I have positive cash flow?
Good. And that is on the list.
Right.
So
that's just which one of us is first.
Well,
right?
okay. So let's talk about both things. So let's talk about positive net worth and positive cash flow. So what does it mean when we say positive net worth?
So positive net worth, there are two components to this. The things that you own and their value versus the debts that you have incurred or you're currently carrying. So a positive number is the things that you own, their value is worth more than the total amount of the debts that you carry.
So if I have $1,000 in the bank and I owe $200 on my credit card, my net worth is what?
$800, if that's all that you have.
And if okay, so then quite obviously positive is better than negative.
Positive, better, it's good, but I have a problem with most Canadians, their net worth, if they have a positive net worth, is tied up in real estate. So it's money they can't access. So I could have net worth of, plus $500,000 because my house has gone up a lot in money, and I'm carrying $200,000 of debt, and I can't pay my bills every month. So my net worth is still positive, but I'm screwed because my cash flow is horrible.
So that's why you want to harp on the cash flow.
Cash is king. It's always been so and always will be.
So we will get to that, but you raise an interesting point about the house. So let's say the typical house is $1 million.
I think that's probably accurate
probably
now,
fairly,
right?
depending on where you are.
Yep.
And let's say my mortgage on that typical house is $800,000.
Okay.
So all else being equal, ignoring, complicated math, I've got a net worth of $200,000.
Right. Sounds good.
Sounds good. Now, what if I have a $10 million house with an $8 million mortgage? In fact, let's say I have a $10 million house with a $9.8 million mortgage.
Right.
In both cases, I have a $200,000 net worth.
Correct.
Do you see any problem between the two?
Well, I'm going to go back to my cash. As long as you can carry or finance that $9.8 million mortgage on your $10 million house, you might be okay. The same guy with the $1 million house and the $800,000 mortgage.
Which is why you're saying it's stupid to look at it that way, because cash is king.
Net worth is a useful tool, and you could use it, I guess, to track changes over time. So is your net worth increasing every year by greater than the inflation rate? Well, that's a good thing. There's something positive happening in your life. But net worth all by itself is not terribly useful in my eyes.
Okay, so you think cash flow is much more useful. So Explain again, what's the calculation for positive cash flow?
Well, so let's keep it simple again. Cash flow has two components: money coming in, money going out. So money coming in is your income, whether it's pensions, employment, self-employment, dividends, however you're getting paid. It's money coming in. You can quantify that every month. Money going out, you can also quantify. How much are you laying out every month? And if that number exceeds the money coming in, that means it's got to be financed by debt, or you're tapping into your net worth and you're reducing your asset base.
So let's do an example of that. And I'm going to, give people an insight thing here that we are working on our budgeting course. And of course, you know that I am not a fan of budgeting.
We don't like the word, for sure.
We don't like the word, but we do like the concept, which is to understand the ins and the outs. Yeah. And so that will likely be released, sometime in the next 2 or 3 months. So let's say that I have a paycheck that is $1,000 every 2 weeks.
You have a paycheck that's $1,000 every 2 weeks.
Ba-doompa.
How did you like that, folks?
So I'm doing my cash flow analysis.
Right.
What do I put on the top line? Do I put 1,000 times 2, or do I put 1,000 times 2.3? Like, how do you do it?
Are you going to do your planning on a paycheck per paycheck basis? Or are you going to do it on a monthly basis? Or are you going to do it on a cash flow basis?
What do you recommend?
Well, so I think the simplest way to do it is by paycheck by paycheck. So if you want to make sure that you're looking at the nuts and bolts, then take it down as deep as you can go.
So I have rent that is $2,000 a month.
Mm-hmm. You're already in trouble then, aren't you?
I am, because my income is the same. And this is kind of what we see with a lot of our clients. So if I'm doing that, I would divide my rent by 26 to come up with my biweekly pay periods.
You could do that, or I tell people to assume if you're getting paid biweekly, you get 2 paychecks a month, and then twice a year you get a bonus.
And that way you've
got a bonus built in somewhere.
So your point is the most important determinant of whether you are financially fit is, do you have positive cash flow?
Right.
And there's nothing else that would trump that. Well, that's a bad word to use in November, but
these days,
that is number one. Okay, and you know what? That kind of makes sense, because cash flow is immediate.
Right.
Like, if I don't have positive cash flow this week, I can't buy groceries, I can't pay my rent. So, Okay, so we've talked about positive cash flow. We've talked about positive net worth. And we're designing this, financially fitness app here.
Right.
So it can track those two things somehow magically. Do you need an emergency fund to be financially fit? Can you be financially fit without an emergency fund?
Yeah, I would argue that you can. You wouldn't be as fit as somebody who has an emergency fund, but you certainly could be fit. Like, I think back, well, when we were younger, a very long time ago.
Many years ago.
Pull out the abacus. And then do you know what the kids today even know what an abacus is?
The kids don't know what an abacus is.
It used to be you had to have some sort of safety net, and it was 2 or 3 months worth of expenses. I think somewhere I want to say in the 90s, it changed to you had to have access to a line of credit or some sort of emergency fund you could tap into equal to 2 or 3 months, but it wasn't necessary to have the savings anymore.
Right. And I think that was even more prevalent if you went back like 5 years because interest rates were zero.
And money was free.
So why would I have $1,000 tied up in a savings account earning nothing when I can have a line of credit that doesn't charge me anything unless I use it? That's a much better emergency fund.
It's assuming you're using that $1,000 that you would have had
productively.
For something productive. Yeah.
Yes. So I paid.
Bad assumption.
Right. I paid down my debt, or I did something productive with it.
Right.
The problem with that theory is what happens, number one, when interest rates go up and now the interest on your line of credit is higher.
Right.
And number two, what happens when the bank says, oh, you don't get a line of credit anymore?
Right. You haven't used it in so long, we're canceling it. That's the easy answer. More realistically, you need it now, and we're not going to let you have it. Right.
Yeah. Banks only want to lend you money when you don't need it.
Right.
If you need it, why would we lend it to you? That doesn't
there must
make
be a
any
problem.
sense. Exactly. So I would argue that to be financially fit, you do need to have a cushion. Now, maybe if you're in really good shape and you don't have to worry about the bank pulling your line of credit, maybe that's sufficient. I guess going back to the first point, which is positive net worth, if you've got a house worth $1 million and have no mortgage, well, even if you don't have an emergency fund, you can probably borrow something against the house.
One would hope.
But most people don't have $1 million house with no mortgage, so
So again, I agree that having this emergency fund or something is important, but I think you can be fit, you just aren't as fit. So now we're talking about
matter of degrees. So, and you can, and people who are watching this on YouTube, go put your note in the comment telling us why we're right or we're wrong on that. But you're right. Fitness is a matter of degrees.
Right.
You can run a marathon in 4 hours or 3 hours or 5 hours. That's a different level.
Or I could get in my car and drive 26 miles.
There you go. So yes, you want to be as fit as possible, I guess. But to take the fitness example to the absurd extreme, you also don't want to be working out 40 hours a day probably. So if we were to agree that you should have some kind of an emergency fund.
Access to something.
How much does it need to be? Is it like X number of months? Is there some formula, or is it just?
Yeah, again, as far as I know, the common wisdom is 2 or 3 months worth of expenses.
Yeah, and I guess the question you got to ask yourself is, if I lost my job tomorrow, and it was how long would it take me to find another one?
Right.
That's how much you need to bridge that gap. So, okay, so we talked about the emergency fund. Kind of a related question. Do you need more than just either cash in the bank or access to funds to be financially fit? So do you also need to have, for example, retirement accounts, an RSP? Can you be financially fit if you don't have a TFSA or an RSP?
So again, let's carry this on. So to initially to be fit, you got to have positive cash flow. And then the fitter you want to be, we'll keep adding these things. So retirement funds or kids' education funds, not as important as positive cash flow. I would argue it might be. Yeah, I don't know if I would put that before the emergency fund or after. That's an interesting point.
Well, I think
because you could always use one of those things as the emergency fund if you got desperate.
Yeah, we don't like cashing in RSPs because you're paying taxes and you're using up your contribution room. But I guess it also depends on how old are you.
Right.
So old people like us whose age starts with a 6.
Hey, can you speak up for me?
Huh? Retirement funds are much more important than somebody who's 20.
We don't get to retire.
No, we don't. We'll be doing this podcast 50 years from now. Hopefully there will be AI replicas of us. In fact, maybe we are AI replicas. Who knows? So it's, if I'm a 60-year-old, which in fact I am, so I can speak to this with authority. I'm hoping that at some point in the next 20 years I can retire.
Right.
So having retirement funds is pretty important. If I'm 20 years old, I think it's much more important to have that emergency fund because I'm much more likely to lose my job. I don't have a bunch of other assets built up or whatever.
Things are more likely to go wrong.
And you don't have that cushion.
Right.
So again, if you've got the house that's paid off and you got money in the bank, well, the emergency fund becomes less important. Do you think that diversification or risk tolerance plays any part of this, or is that like, we don't even need to go there?
I think that's you're starting to get too sophisticated for the average individual, and that's one of the tricks that the investment industry uses for people. You need to be diversified. You need to have some of this, some of that. You've got to make sure your portfolio's spread around. I think for the average guy, most of that's just BS.
So if I've got $1,000 saved up,
right,
I would put it in a savings account.
Yeah, or $1,000 worth of bank stock or something simple, something that's easily liquidated. You don't have to worry too much about it. You don't have to be sophisticated to understand it.
Right. Now, if I've got $100 million, okay, then I guess you're going to spread it around.
And you probably pay somebody to do this stuff for you, or you're pretty sophisticated in the first place.
You got a team of people. So you're of the camp, focus on the basic things.
Right.
Positive cash flow. Don't worry about whether you've put your savings in 12 different stocks and spread it around and all the rest of it.
And never invest in something you don't understand, but that's a different conversation.
No, and that's an important point. I mean, that's one of the reasons I'm not a real estate investor.
Right.
I don't care for it.
And you've always had a pretty low opinion of real estate.
Yeah,
so.
And I've been wrong for the last 20 years. But yes, I believe a house is a place you live.
Right.
Now, obviously, if you know what you're doing, you can be a real estate investor and make lots of money as well. So, okay, so back to I'm throwing things at you. Do you need this to be financially fit or not?
Right.
So my next question is, can you be financially fit if you don't regularly update your budget?
Oh, that horrible budget word again.
And again, you can answer the question by saying, okay, forget about the word budget.
Yeah.
Can you be financially fit if you aren't keeping track of the ins and the outs?
Well, so let's say I'm going to use a different word. If you don't have a plan. And so if you have a plan, you have to periodically review it to make sure it's okay. Can you be financially fit if you don't have a plan? Probably not. Like if you don't have goals or objectives, how do you know if you're meeting your goals or objectives?
Well, because, and I'm not a fan of goals and objectives.
Right.
Again, back to the fitness example, my goal is I want to lose 10 pounds.
Right.
Okay, so I work really hard and I lose 9 pounds. Mm-hmm. I'm a failure.
Apparently.
If I lose 11 pounds, I guess my goal wasn't enough.
Well, that means you can go out and have a splurge.
There you go. Absolutely.
Which means you'll put the 10 pounds back on.
That's right.
It's a cycle.
I'll be right back there. Whereas, I'm much more a believer in a system. My system is I get rid of all the junk food from my house.
Right.
So I'm less likely to be putting on weight. And so when it comes to financial fitness, okay, I don't want to have a budget because it takes a lot of work. So I need to design systems. Now, you already mentioned one system.
Yep.
Your system was I live paycheck to paycheck, but you said it in a positive manner, which was, okay, every payday, I pay my expenses.
Right. So you build a plan.
Oh, plan.
Based around your paychecks. The money is coming in. This is when I'm going to plan for my money going out.
So, but you can do that plan in advance. So I go into the fancy computer thing on the.
And so to flip back your question then, so you've got this plan in place. What does it mean to review it? Like is this something I got to write out on a piece of paper and I've got to, look at it once a year on my birthday, or, I'm just assessing as I go along?
That's a good question. What's the answer?
I don't write a lot of this stuff down because, I don't want my wife knowing what I got.
There we go. So, yeah. And so my answer to your question would be, okay, so I have a cell phone bill that's due once a month and it's $100 and I get paid bi-weekly. So what I do is I go on to the World Wide Web. You know what that thing is, right? The www. And I say, send $50 to the cell phone company every payday. And so every payday, it just automatic. Now, you got to go in and set it up. I don't know. Maybe
I'm not happy about automatic payments because, you forget you're making the damn things. But cell phone's probably okay.
But in this case, you have to make it. But that gets back to your point about, okay, how are you assessing it? Well, I guess the way I'm assessing it is every month they send me a bill. Now, I get them electronically. It pops up on the computer.
Right.
I can look at it and go, oh, look, I don't owe anything.
Mm-hmm.
I guess we're good. On to the next month.
Yep.
Now, if my cell phone bill has gone up to $120 a month and I'm only sending them $50 twice a month,
it's going to start building.
So I better adjust.
Right.
And that to me is a.
And if you suddenly get a bill for $600,
something's really wrong.
Somebody's using your cell phone.
That's right. So you got kids, right? You understand all
Teenagers,
that.
all
of them. You understand that concept really well. So I think that would be my plan.
Okay.
To use your word, which is I think about it in advance. I set up the automatic payments. And I look at them every month as they're as I'm getting the bill. So, is that a budget?
Well, it's a style of budget, a form of budget, right? We just don't like the word,
right? And so, if I'm doing that, would you argue that yes, I'm financially
fit? You have a
fit?
budget,
yeah.
As long as it's positive,
yeah. So, okay. So I think that's kind of what we're getting at. It does not have to be the way the conventional thinking is that I've got a piece of paper and I write all the numbers down. We both agree you have to know what's going on with the ins and the outs.
You have, and look, nobody is as interested in your life as you are. And if you don't take interest in this stuff,
nobody else will.
Right.
Nobody else cares. And so you had asked the question about frequency then.
Mm-hmm.
So in my system, I'm looking at the bills every month. That's sufficient, I would assume.
I would think, yes. I mean, you might want to do a deep dive once a year on your birthday or something, or annually, just to, because there's some stuff, we just keep doing stuff. It's, I've always done that. It's automatic. I do it. Well, do I really need to still be doing that? So the cell phone's a good example. You got to have a cell phone and you pay it every month. Well, are there a bunch of features on this phone I'm not using anymore? Cable maybe is an even better example. Right?
Or streaming subscriptions.
Right. Or any magazine subscriptions or God knows anything else. Are you using all this stuff?
Yeah. Do you need to have Netflix and write me off all the other ones the kids are watching today?
Netflix, Disney, Prime. What else are they watching?
There's probably a few others we're missing. So in the middle of the summer, when you're outside all the time, do you really need 3 streaming services? Maybe in the winter, okay, I'll watch more TV or something. So yeah, that would be something you would not be reviewing every month.
Right. You just wouldn't think of it every month.
But I like your plan.
Yeah.
That's our phone number, people. 310 plan.
How'd that happen?
I don't know. It's my birthday, it's Christmas, it's New Year's, whatever.
Right.
Let's
it's
take
like
a look
looking at your insurance coverage. It's like writing down all your passwords someplace in case you get hit by a bus next week. At least once a year, do this deep dive into your life and assess things.
And that will increase your financial fitness. Okay, now the next item on the list you've already addressed.
Mm-hmm.
And the question is, must you set financial goals to be financially fit? And I think you said, well, sort of, yeah. Was that your answer?
Yeah. I mean, you can't. What's another way to look at this? Flip it over the other way. How do you know if you're not financially fit? Well, so if you're stressed about money all the time, you're probably not financially fit.
Right. But would that be a case of I don't have a goal, or would it be a case of I'm not making enough money at my job to cover my expenses?
Your goal might be that you don't want to be stressed about money.
Yeah. So you need to.
Depends on how you want to spin this, right?
Yeah. And I think, as I said, I'm more of a systems guy than a goals guy.
Right.
So what can I do to get my expenses to the point where I have positive cash flow, which is your number one thing?
That's it. It all falls back to you got to have positive cash flow. Then you shouldn't be stressed about money.
Because if I have positive cash flow, pretty much everything else takes care of itself.
It should. I mean, it's the first step to doing all of these other things that we're talking about.
Yeah, if I need to buy a new pair of boots 2 months from now, well, having positive cash flow will generate the cash so I can do it.
Set aside money for new boots.
Don't have to worry. Exactly. I don't have to worry about what my credit rating is or anything else. So are you then of the plan, going back to the whole goal thing,
right?
Should I have like the short, medium, and long-term ones, or is it like, let's not overthink this?
Yeah, the overthinking isn't going to get you anywhere except for more stressed out about this stuff. But you have to have some kind of objective in plan. Otherwise, how do you know you've reached your objective?
Yeah. So if my goal is I would like to buy a house someday, then I guess you can do the math. How much does a house cost? How much of a down payment cost? If I need to save up this much, maybe it's going to take me 5 years or 10 years or whatever. Well, if I save this much per month, I'll eventually get to that goal.
Right.
So under that case, I can see why a goal would matter. And I need to save this much for retirement. I need to buy a car, whatever. But I still fall back on it's even better to have a system in place where you don't have to think about it too much.
But you're, with your system, are you going to build into your system, I'm going to be building a nest egg or a retirement fund or something? I mean, your system has goals.
Right. And I think that's when it comes to finances, you got to have both.
Right.
And just like you want to focus a lot more on cash flow than on net worth, which makes sense to me, I like to focus more on systems than goals.
Right.
Because a system is something you set it and forget it.
Right.
You know, that guy with the rotisserie chickens, right? Set it and forget it. So I know where my money's going. Every paycheck it goes out, and automatically I'm putting X number of dollars into my savings account. Right. I don't have to think about it every time.
It's being dealt with.
It's being dealt with. Whatever money's in the bank account at the end of the week, I can spend it because I've taken care of it.
Right.
And then final question for you is, do you have to have an understanding of risk or risk mitigation to be financially fit? So I'm thinking about things like insurance, for example. So let's take life insurance. I mean, obviously you have to have car insurance. The law says you have to, so we don't have to talk about that.
Yeah, but you don't have to have as much as most people carry. Like the law sets minimums that are pretty much useless. But if you have a high tolerance for risk, maybe useless is what you want.
Well, which is why I don't have collision insurance on my car because
it's $2 million.
Exactly.
Yours is soon going to be an antique.
That's right.
Perhaps you should.
I might have to get the special license plate
you
for
and Mr. Buffett.
It's only like 12 years old. So, okay, let's talk about life insurance then.
Mm-hmm.
And now, if you're a 20-year-old single guy, who cares? No offense, but if you die, no one else is.
You got no responsibilities,
right? But if you are somebody who has a spouse, kids, other responsibilities, then are you financially fit if you don't have life insurance?
That's an interesting question. If you don't think that's important, and otherwise you meet the criteria you're talking about, then sure. But it's like the other things we had. Again, cash is king first, and then it's what priority do you list all of these other things in? I would put life insurance somewhere before retirement. The younger that you are, and the older that you get, retirement becomes more important than life insurance, assuming you don't have a high level of debt or whatever.
Right. And obviously something like saving for the kids' education or retirement, you can't just start that 2 days before you need it.
Right.
Which is where the priority. And I think you've just summed up the whole show right there. Mm-hmm. It's a question of priorities.
Right.
So again, going back to the example of you and the marathons that you run. So do I spend all my time running, or do I have to do some strength training? Do I have to do some cross training? Do I have to go for a swim? Do I have to focus on nutrition?
Do I have to see a psychiatrist to stop me from running?
Probably the starting point right there. And the answer is, well, yeah, all of those things are important.
Right.
But you got to prioritize because you can't do all the same. And I think with money, it comes down to exactly the same thing.
Right.
To be financially fit, you're saying number one is cash flow.
Right.
The ins have to be bigger than the outs. Mm-hmm. And if they aren't, well, then none of the rest of this stuff matters.
It's impossible to be fit if you don't meet that first criteria.
You just can't do it.
Right.
So if you want to run a marathon and you can't walk around the block, okay, well then you got to start with that.
Right.
So that's the number one thing, which is easy for us to say and hard to do.
Right. But I mean, the problem is that you don't have as much control over your expenses as you do as your income. So if you want to increase your income, you got to find a second job. You go to your boss, you ask for more money. There are things that you can do. They're limited, but there are. If your expenses go up, I mean, they can go up overnight. There's not a hell of a lot you can do about it. The interest rates, right? The trends have been the greatest example for people.
Yeah. Well, and if I'm renting an apartment, I can't just cut my rent in half next week unless I get a roommate or something. So they tend to be a little more sticky. But I agree. I think priority number one is cash flow. Get that to be its positive, and then it's up to you to decide what all the other things are.
Right.
How much? So let's say I've got $500 left over at the end of the month. Mm-hmm. Not left over, but that I've carved out of my budget. Great. How much goes to retirement, my kids' savings, my emergency fund, whatever else I want to do with the money? Well, you got to decide.
Right. And again, nobody else is going to decide for you, at least not. I mean, you're the only one who's interested in what happens to you.
Well, and you're the one who's got to make the sacrifice to cut out this dollar today so that I can put it into the savings fund or whatever for tomorrow. You should be the one deciding that.
Right.
And I guess if we were in charge of Financial Literacy Month, which we aren't, then that's what we'd be telling people.
Right.
You got to figure it out. You got to think for yourself. You got to make the decision. Sure, listen to all the crazy podcasters out there. Read as much material as you can, all that kind of stuff. But I agree with you. You're the only one who can make these decisions for yourself. So, So there you go. Ted's answer to the question, what is considered to be financially fit? Cash flow. And everything else is secondary to that. And you know what? Kind of hard to argue with that logic. So the question for everybody is, go on to the YouTube and the comment section there. What does financial fitness mean to you? So tell us where we're wrong or right. And there might be something we've totally not thought about. Well, great. Throw that in there. The commercial, since we don't have a sponsor, is that, if you have enjoyed this episode, check out our previous discussions on debt management on this channel, which is, of course, Debt Free in 30 channel if you're on YouTube.
Right.
And you can get more in-depth financial concepts and debt solutions at Hoyes and Ted Michalos, which is our other YouTube channel. And you and I, of course, are now huge on TikTok.
Of course we are.
We record little short explainer things and answer questions and things like that.
Right. For those of you who want to see us.
That's right. And you and I have never been on TikTok, but we are told that on TikTok and Instagram and Facebook and all that sort of stuff is there. So check those things out. And again, if you're watching on YouTube, subscribe, hit the notification bell. Most people do not want to see us, amazingly enough. We get a lot more listens than we get views. So if you're on Spotify or Apple Podcasts or anywhere else, then again, subscribe, and you will get a new podcast every week, which will happen. But until next week, thanks for listening. I'm Doug Hoyes. That was Ted Michalos, and that was Debt Free in 30.